while I stood in the doorway of the hotel room 2 hours earlier. She'd used 2 pins I'd handed her when she asked for help. Her manicure, deep maroon, barely dry when she slipped on her heels, matched the one in the photo. Same shimmer, same length. And the bathroom? I recognized the tiles, the marble counter, the complimentary miniature bottles from the brand our agency had just partnered with. It wasn't a coincidence. It was our hotel. From tonight, my stomach dropped. Claire glanced at me sideways, her smile still flawless as she whispered something to the founder of one of our biggest clients. Her voice didn't shake. Her grip on my arm was light, relaxed. She looked like someone in total control. And I felt like I was losing gravity. My brain raced. Could it be a trick of the light? A mistake? Maybe the photo had been taken weeks ago and she wore the same outfit again? But that didn't make sense. Claire never repeated a look. Not for big events. Not ever. No, it wasn't a prank. It wasn't old. It was fresh. And whoever had uploaded that image, accident or sabotage, they had just exposed something Claire clearly never meant to surface. I wanted to ask her. I wanted to whisper, "Who was that?" Right then and there. But I didn't. Because in that moment, something inside me shifted. The kind of shift that isn't loud but final. Like a floorboard snapping under too much weight. I realized, if I asked, she'd have an answer ready. She always did. It would sound just plausible enough to make me question myself. And I'd walk away wondering if maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Again. So I didn't ask. Instead, I stood next to her, glass in hand, playing the role of the supportive husband while her coworkers buzzed around us. People talked to me about forecasts and client growth, but all I could think about was that image. Her posture. That familiarity with the man behind her. The soft placement of her fingers on his chest. Like it wasn't new. Like it wasn't just once. It wasn't just the photo that haunted me. It was how well she recovered. The way she redirected attention. Flipped the moment. Turned a minefield into a joke with zero hesitation. I'd seen her use that SK*LL in boardrooms before, but never on me. She didn't flinch. And that scared me more than anything. Because now I had to wonder, how many times had I seen that look? That smile? That effortless ease? And how many times had it been hiding something? Later that night, after the event started winding down, Claire made the rounds, congratulating her team, posing for selfies, promising follow-up meetings. She kissed me lightly on the cheek and told me to head upstairs and relax, that she'd be up in 10. Said she wanted to walk Tyler out and check in with the event coordinator. I nodded, and I went upstairs like a good husband would. But I didn't sleep. I sat in the armchair facing the hotel window, tie loosened, jacket draped over the side, replaying every moment of that night in my mind. The photo, her reaction, the softness in her voice as she laughed it off. My own silence, thick in my throat like tar. And one thought kept repeating in my head, looping like static. That was tonight. That was tonight. They say hindsight is 20/20ths, but I think that's giving it too much credit. It wasn't like everything became clear in an instant after that night. It was more like a puzzle coming into focus piece by piece. Things I'd dismissed, ignored, rationalized. They started to settle into place like parts of a pattern I'd refused to see. And once I did, I couldn't unsee it. The next morning after the anniversary party, Claire acted like nothing had happened. She hummed in the shower. She scrolled through congratulatory emails while sipping coffee on the balcony. When I tried to bring up the photo casually like I just wanted to understand, she laughed again, gave me the same bachelorette prank line, then changed the subject to whether we should hire a new PR lead for Q4. And I let it go, out loud at least, but something inside me had shifted. I started replaying things from the past few months, trying to figure out when exactly the version of Claire I thought I knew had been replaced with whoever she was becoming. The first puzzle piece was her travel. She started taking more strategy retreats earlier this year, usually 2 or 3 days at boutique hotels or off-site locations with vague names like the Consulting Group or Brand Ecosystem Alignment. It never struck me as strange at first. She was the face of the agency, after all. People wanted her in the room. But looking back, those trips always popped up last minute. No calendar invites. No emails I could recall seeing. I checked my phone's shared location history one evening while she was in Asheville. It had been disabled. Quietly. No alert. Just off. I'd brought it up at the time. She smiled and said, "Oh, weird. Maybe it glitched." Then she handed me a glass of wine and changed the playlist. Piece 2, the phone. Claire's phone was always face down lately. Not just sometimes, always. At dinner, at home, even during weekends away. When it buzzed, she'd swipe it up and respond without a word, then drop its screen down again like it was second nature. At first, I chalked it up to habit. But the truth? Claire wasn't the screen down type before, and she'd switched to a heavier perfume. Stronger. Muskier. It clung to her clothes and hair like it had something to prove. She said it was a sample from a client. "Everyone's wearing it in New York," she told me. But I never saw the bottle at home. I only smelled it when she came back late. And she was coming back late more often. Back-to-back meetings, she'd say. The team wanted to workshop some things after hours. And once, only once, she came home in heels I didn't recognize. I remember pointing them out. "Oh, those?" she said, glancing down like she'd forgotten. "I bought them with the other pair. You liked the nude ones, remember?" But the receipt in the bag said otherwise. 2 different stores. 2 different dates. Neither pair I'd ever seen again. More pieces. She started buying lingerie. Not just 1 or 2 things, bags from boutique shops I'd never heard of. Lace, silk, wrapped in tissue. Tags still on. But I never saw them on her. Not once. One night, I asked, casually like I was teasing, "What's with all the fancy stuff lately? You planning to surprise me?" She smiled without looking up from her laptop and said, "I'm just feeling more confident lately. Thought I'd treat myself." Except that confidence never showed up around me. That was the other thing, how she started treating me in public. At work events, Claire stopped calling me her husband. She'd introduce me as Alex. Full stop. "This is Alex," she'd say to new clients or board members, with no mention of our last name, no hint of our relationship. Once, I tried to add a joke, her husband/unpaid chauffeur. But she cut it off with a tight laugh and steered the conversation back to branding strategies. It was like I'd been edited out of her professional narrative. Even our personal life started to fray around the edges. Conversations we'd planned about kids, about moving, about whether we were happy were always postponed. "Let's not ruin the weekend," she'd say. "Can we not do this after 12 hours in meetings?" She took fast showers after getting home, like she was in a rush to wash something off. And more than once, I caught her in a daze, just staring into her phone screen like it was speaking to her in a language I didn't understand. I kept trying to be the calm one, the rational one. I told myself I was being paranoid, that things were just changing because we were both under pressure, that Claire was evolving, maybe growing past me a little, but still tethered to the same life. But deep down, I knew. The pieces were all there. The missing hours, the strategic vagueness, the physical distance, the shift in how she looked at me, like I was furniture, familiar, unremarkable, functional, not someone you reach for when you walk into a room. There was one night I remember in particular. She was asleep, curled away from me, her back barely touching mine. I lay there wide awake, watching the ceiling fan turn shadows and circles across the room. And I asked myself, when did we stop feeling like us? I couldn't answer. It wasn't just a gut feeling anymore. It was a timeline, pattern, a slow but deliberate unraveling of trust, int asterisk Macy, and something I once believed was bulletproof. I started paying closer attention after that, not just to her but to myself, to how I'd become quiet, how I let things slide. How I told myself it was fine because I didn't want to be the guy who snoops through phones or second-guesses his wife. But now I was the guy who couldn't ignore the smell of cologne on her scarf, who noticed when her voice got softer on the phone if I walked into the room, who heard her whisper someone else's name in her sleep once, and tried to convince himself he imagined it. I wasn't imagining it anymore. The mosaic was complete, and all I had to do now was wait for confirmation. There's a strange kind of peace that comes right after the last thread snaps. Not relief, not yet, but something quieter than pain. Like your body finally gives up trying to lie to your mind, and the truth settles in. Heavy, final, cold. That moment came 3 days after the anniversary party. I remember the details with nauseating clarity, not because they were dramatic, but because they were ordinary. A Tuesday, cloudy. One of those days where the light never really changes, where the sky stays stuck in a dull gray halfway between dawn and dusk. I had skipped a morning meeting, telling my assistant I had a headache. Truthfully, I just couldn't bring myself to walk into the conference room and pretend everything was normal while my head kept replaying that damn photo. Claire had gone in early, said she needed to prep for an internal review. I didn't question it. I barely said anything, actually. We'd grown so good at avoiding real conversation that silence between us no longer felt unusual. Felt standard. By noon, I was restless. I told myself I just needed air, but I ended up driving to the office without meaning to. I didn't park in the main lot. I used the back entrance, the one near the loading dock, a little-used access hallway that fed into the creative wing. No cameras, no questions. I didn't even know why I was sneaking in, honestly. It wasn't a plan. It was instinct. I didn't expect to see anything. I just wanted to walk through the halls, to remind myself that this place was still mine, that the agency we built together wasn't completely slipping through my fingers. That's when I saw them, Claire and Eric, inside the small glass-walled meeting room we called the aquarium, floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides, with soundproofing that always made it feel like a silent film. I froze mid-step, half-shielded behind a column, out of their line of sight. They were alone. No documents, no laptops, no notepads, nothing that even tried to pretend they were working. She was leaning against the wall, arms folded, smiling in that particular way, the one I used to think was mine. Her whole posture had shifted, relaxed, open, like she was no longer managing an employee but meeting a lover between moments of real life. Eric stepped toward her, said something. She laughed. Then, without hesitation, he kissed her. Not fast, not uncertain. A kiss with history. It wasn't passionate. It was practiced. Familiar. Claire's hand slipped behind his neck in the kind of touch that doesn't come from a fling. Comes from repetition, comfort, muscle memory. I didn't look away. That was the worst part. I watched, frozen in place, as the woman I built a life with touched someone else like they were her gravity. And the terrifying thing? She looked happy. Light in a way I hadn't seen in months. Years, maybe. They didn't notice me. After maybe 20 seconds, she adjusted his collar, gave a small laugh, and walked toward the door. He followed. Just 2 co-workers, slipping out of a side room. Business as usual. I didn't confront them. I backed into the stairwell and waited until I couldn't hear their voices anymore. Then I walked down the stairs, past the break room, and out the same service entrance I'd come in through. It was done. All the questions, all the doubts, all the mental gymnastics I'd done to avoid landing here. Over. There was no speech, no denial, no technicality. I saw what I saw, and it changed everything. You'd think once you saw it with your own eyes, your wife kissing another man behind a wall of glass in your own company, you'd be done. You'd walk away, close the book, and never turn the page again. But betrayal doesn't work like that. It doesn't K*LL everything at once. It rots slowly, quietly, like a leak under floorboards. And some part of you, even after all the proof, still searches for an explanation that will make it make sense. That part of me was still alive when Claire asked if I wanted to come to Tyler's birthday party. Tyler, the golden boy of the agency. Tall, handsome, overconfident in the way people in their early 30s are when success comes too early and too easily. Clients loved him. Claire loved that clients loved him. She used to say he was the kind of guy you put in front of a room when you needed everyone to think the brand had youth appeal. The party was being held at a rooftop bar in Jacksonville. Claire called it a team-building/celebration/networking opportunity. Said it would be good for us to go as a couple, to show the agency was still in sync at the top. That phrasing stuck with me. Not a night out. Not just fun. A performance. An act of cohesion. I agreed to go. Not because I believed her, but because I wanted to see how deep the performance went. We drove down that afternoon. The air between us in the car was filled with music and polite conversation. Client updates, new vendors, campaign pacing. Nothing personal. Nothing risky. Just two executives en route to a company event. As if we hadn't been sleeping 3 feet apart for weeks. Claire looked stunning. Of course she did. She wore a black jumpsuit with a plunging neckline, gold jewelry, hair straightened and tucked behind one ear. I noticed she wore the same perfume she'd worn the night I saw her with Eric. That same heavy scent with vanilla and smoke undertones. It hit like déjà vu the second I smelled it. The rooftop was already buzzing by the time we arrived. Music pulsing, cocktails sweating in tall glasses, employees letting loose in the way only young professionals can when drinks are comped and the view is good. Tyler was holding court near the bar, his arm around someone from accounts, laughing like he'd never once been uncertain of anything in his life. When he saw Claire, he lit up, walked straight over. "Look who finally made it," he said, pulling her into a hug that lasted a half-second too long. Then he turned to me. "Alex, glad you came, man." He clapped me on the back like we were old friends. I managed to smile. We mingled. Claire drifted in and out of groups like she always did. Effortlessly, gracefully, strategically. She had a drink in one hand and compliments in the other, never missing a beat. I watched her from across the space, wondering how many people in this room knew. How many were complicit in their silence. After about an hour, the crowd gathered near the edge of the patio for Tyler's toast. He stood on a step near the railing, drink in hand, grin wide. All right, he called out. "I know no one wants to hear speeches on their birthday, but let me just say, this year's been insane. Couldn't have done any of it without the best team I've ever worked with." Cheers erupted. He waited, let the moment land. "And one person in particular," he continued, eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Claire, "has been, let's just say, central to all of it." There was an audible pause, a shift in the room's energy. Claire's expression barely changed, but I noticed the way she tensed, just slightly. The way someone might if a waiter spilled a drink and they tried not to react. Tyler smiled wider. "Claire's been more than just a mentor, more than just a partner in the business sense. Let's just say this year's been full of surprises, and big changes ahead." He raised his glass. To what's next? Scattered applause, some laughter, a few knowing looks. I watched Claire. She smiled, tilted her glass, said nothing, but her eyes didn't meet mine. She turned away after the toast, diving back into the crowd. I followed at a distance, not quite sure what I was doing. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. I was past that. I was cataloging every reaction, every glance, every shift in her body language. I caught her in conversation with Tyler a few minutes later, near the stairwell. They were angled in, speaking quietly. She was trying to look casual. He was smirking. She placed a hand on his chest for just a moment, and then quickly pulled it back, like she'd forgotten where she was, like she'd forgotten I was there. When she turned and saw me watching, her face went pale. She didn't come over. She didn't offer an explanation. She just blinked and turned away again. That was it. The moment that took whatever was left of our marriage and broke it in half. Not the kiss in the glass room, not the photo on the screen, but this, the public slip, the quiet confirmation, the moment her performance cracked just enough for the truth to leak out in front of everyone. And no one said a word. No one looked surprised. That was the part that hurt the most. The silence. The way people smiled and laughed and carried on like they hadn't just heard a man announce his affair in front of his colleagues and his colleague's husband, and imply that something official was coming soon. Like I wasn't even there. Like I'd already been written out of the story. After the birthday party, there was no confrontation. No dramatic fight in the car. No slammed doors or shouted accusations. Claire kept the silence the entire drive home, pretending to scroll her phone while staring into the black reflection of the passenger window. She knew I saw, and I knew she wasn't going to explain. There was nothing left to clarify. But I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to demand she confess or beg me to understand. That's not how this would go. I was done being blindsided. Now it was my turn to move quietly, deliberately, with precision. Not out of revenge. Out of self-preservation. I stopped thinking like a husband. I started thinking like a partner with something to lose. The first thing I did was pull every shared financial record into a private folder and transfer my rightful share of our liquid assets into a trust under my name only. My lawyer had told me once, years ago, always have an exit plan, even if you never use it. I never thought I'd need it. But here I was, using every ounce of advice he gave me like breadcrumbs out of the woods. Next came the passwords. Claire didn't notice when the Wi-Fi asked her to re-enter credentials 2 days later. She didn't say anything when her agency login failed temporarily that afternoon, or when her calendar stopped syncing to our shared home screen. These were small fractures, intentional and spaced out. I let her believe it was just tech being tech. Meanwhile, I changed all account security questions, enabled dual authentication on the servers she never accessed, and revoked her access to files I knew she didn't use regularly. She wouldn't notice the missing keys until she reached for the lock. The agency was ours in name only. I handled the infrastructure, the vendor relations, the financials. Claire was the face, yes, but I was the frame. So I called in an external compliance consultant quietly under the guise of reviewing team dynamics. It wasn't hard to justify. Claire had blurred every professional line imaginable. She was a managing partner carrying on with an intern. That alone was enough to trigger a full review if I pushed it. But I didn't need to blow anything up yet. I just needed documentation, leverage, and I got it. The consultant flagged it within a week. Inappropriate conduct, concerns over power imbalance, potential for litigation if the situation escalated or went public. I tucked the report away like a loaded round I hoped I wouldn't have to fire. Eric, who had apparently resigned via email 2 days prior, wasn't going to be a problem. He didn't even list a forwarding address. Smart move. Cowardly but smart. With him out of the picture, Claire was suddenly vulnerable in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her silence at home shifted, more distracted than distant. She started asking vague questions. Have you seen my card for the WeWork account? Did you change the Dropbox folder permissions? My keycard didn't work this morning. Was there a system update? I shrugged, acted confused, said I'd look into it. She didn't press. She couldn't afford to. She knew something had changed. She just didn't know how much. Her agency email still worked, for now. Her business cards were still stacked in the office drawer. But the engine underneath had already been restructured. She just hadn't caught up to the new map. I reassigned her managerial responsibilities. Quietly redistributed access to junior teams she no longer directly oversaw. I introduced a new client liaison. Someone Claire had once deemed too green, but who had, in truth, been ready for months. The last thing I did was prepare the documents. Ownership redistribution. It wouldn't erase her name from the agency, but it would change her stake, her vote, her control. Everything would be restructured within the bounds of our agreement, and I had every clause, every timestamp, every invoice lined up. The assets she didn't think I would protect had already been locked. The doors she assumed would open forever were now tied to access she no longer held. Her keycard still worked, for now. Her office door still unlocked, for now. But it was only a matter of time. Everything was on a timer, pre-scheduled, triggered by back-end systems that would move without emotion, without warning. And when that day came, when her badge failed, when her email bounced, when the server politely informed her she no longer had permission, it wouldn't be personal. It would be procedural, because I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to extract myself, protect what was mine, and leave behind only the exact amount of silence she'd earned. Word spread in whispers, not headlines. Eric resigned quietly. Claire's access failed during a Monday meeting. No files, no rooms, no replies. The creative team excluded her from reviews. Clients stopped responding. No blow-up, just absence. Her posts stayed cheerful, curated, hollow. The agency moved on without her, and no one rushed to pull her back in. Reputation doesn't explode, it evaporates. I left for a cabin near the Blue Ridge foothills. Peace found me in morning walks and coffee without conflict. Nora, the neighbor, brought over fresh bread one day, and conversation came easy. Business stabilized. Life slowed. Weeks later, Claire's email arrived, apologizing, admitting everything. I didn't answer. There was no bitterness left, only distance. The story had ended, and I didn't need to reread it to move on.